Hey there, Terror Talks fans. Are you looking for some other content to listen to? Well, check out our friends at Tales from the Crypt. Join them on a journey into the unexplained, the unnatural, and the unbelievably scary. Every week, they dig through the creepiest and weirdest listener stories, almost too horrifying to be true. This ghoulishly delightful podcast is narrated by two ghoulish girls. Have a story to tell? Questions? Comments? Contact them at tftcsub@gmail.com. Be sure to check them out and let them know the Terror Talk sent you. Hey Terror Talk fans, you are listening to another episode of the Terror Talks. Today we're on episode 9, and on today's episode we are going to be talking about the Conjuring Series, but we're not going to be talking about the third one, we're going to be talking about the first and second one. We had just seen the third one. If you watched episode 5, you heard our thoughts, feelings on that. We kind of walked you through the movie and just discussed it, talked about it. Another amazing work by director James Wan. He absolutely killed it, knocked it out of the park. But we're going to go back now, and we're going to talk about the first and second one. I have seen them both. No, I take that back. I have seen the first one before, but it was a long, long time ago. And I don't believe I had ever seen the second one before. So I really was seeing the second one for the first time when we watched it. So that was fun. And I gotta tell you, awesome directing, awesome film all around. 10 out of 10 would highly recommend. For it being my first time seeing it, I was very, very impressed with the second one. I was just as impressed as I was the first time I saw the first one. But we're gonna kind of talk about both of them, dissect them just a little bit. We're not gonna do quite the play-by-play that we did on the fifth one. We're trying out different formats here, kind of see what you guys like, what you're most comfortable with. So we're just going to kind of dive right in. The first Conjuring, The Conjuring, the movie that started it all, stars Patrick Wilson as Ed Warren and Vera Farmiga as Lorraine Warren. So, where to begin with that one? So, I really liked the way that they kind of started and opened the whole series by doing a callback to another very excellent horror film, because I think a lot of people didn't quite realize they were going to do something like that. So like the first one opens up with Ed and Lorraine talking to these three girls who were involved in the Annabelle case. So I thought that was like a really, really neat kind of tie-in to these other paranormal flicks. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm not positive on this, if I am, or we'll figure it out later, but if I'm not mistaken, James Wan had a big hand in all of the different paranormal films that were made. He's been kind of around the block here and there doing all of them. He is definitely, I would say probably at this point, he's a world-renowned horror movie maker. Let's see here. Annabelle. I'm gonna fact check this now while I have a second. Okay, so Annabelle was not directed by James Wan. It was directed by John R. Leonetti. So then it was just by happenstance that James Wan said, hey, let's do a callback to another paranormal flick, because they all lived in the same universe, I guess you could say, because all of them are based on true stories. All the Conjurings are based on the actual findings and events that Ed and Lorraine took part in. Annabelle is based on a real doll. I'm sure if I dive in and look at all of them, a lot of them are based on true, real experiences. So it makes sense that they would find a way to kind of call back to that. I think that was a very neat kind of tie-in from the get-go, and I'm glad they did that. So, you start off and you see this Annabelle kind of callback, and it explains who Ed and Lorraine are, and I love that. Like, you get that brief explanation. You see that these two are clearly paranormal people. Call them what you want: paranormal investigators, demonologists, as they say in the movie, kooks, out of their mind. But then at the end, they're like, we simply just want to be called Ed and Lorraine Warren. So that's who they are, Ed and Lorraine Warren. So, getting down to brass taxes here, we get into the movie, and this one focuses on the Perron family, who have moved into their little house out in the country, pretty much. A little bit of a fixer-upper from the get-go. You see that pretty run down, not gonna lie. And one of the things I love about it is how they introduced this kind of idea that was going to kind of show up in the movie, which was the hide and clap game. That you see that very early on. One of the girls being played by Joey King, fabulous actress. You see that very early on. They're playing this game called hide and clap, and I'm guessing it's one that they just made up. I don't know. But they're playing that, and that really kind of plays with this idea of you're going to hear things when you're not looking at them. Because the idea of hide and clap is you're blindfolded, they spin you around, and then you get 3 claps, you listen for the clap, and so you're just hearing these noises everywhere. And so in a really interesting kind of way, they're foreshadowing what you're going to get a little bit later in the film, and I never really thought about it that way before, but I think that's a really neat kind of thing they did, because later on, when the Warrens are investigating the house, they set up cameras and bells to kind of play into that whole idea of, hearing something but not seeing it. So that's a really neat kind of tie-in. And then, of course, the ghost at one point ends up playing hide and clap with one of the little girls, and that is really creepy. So, the family moves in, and while playing hide and clap, they stumble upon this cellar that they didn't even realize they had, which basically, from my understanding, they never really explain it. When they bust into the cellar, that's kind of their way of inviting the demon in, I guess you could say. They invite the demon, the spirits, into the house. They create, for lack of a better word, they create a portal that allows them to enter. And, you hear all the time in these ghost hunting shows and stuff, and you'll hear paranormal experts talk about it, that it's very easy to basically create a portal for the spirits to come through to invite demons into your house. That's why they say, don't play with Ouija boards. Don't, be careful where you live, basically. Do your homework. Honestly, just do your homework on the house that you're living in. So they move in, they open up this portal, basically, and then weird starts happening almost immediately. The mom is waking up with bruises on her arms. One of the sisters, she's sleepwalking, and that's really creepy, because when she sleepwalks, she ends up walking into a, I guess you would call it like a wardrobe. She gets up and walks into a wardrobe, and she just kind of like bangs her head into it, and just repeatedly does that. And of course, the family just kind of rubs it off as nothing. They're like, it happens. She did this when she was a kid. Oh, she's sleepwalking again. Big deal. Nothing crazy. But then, I'm sitting there as the viewer. I'm like, okay, she's sleepwalking again. And what really strikes me as interesting is the mom says, she says, oh, she hadn't done that for a while. I wonder why she's doing that again. It's like, yeah, I wonder why. Anyone with a half shimmer of a brain realizes why. So what ends up happening next is, the occurrences keep on happening. Lots of weird stuff. The mom plays hide and clap with her daughter, and she hears the clap, and her daughter is not even in the same room as her. So she about herself right there, because she hears this pair of clap behind her, and then her daughter comes up from somewhere else, not even in the same room, and even tells her, she goes, "Oh, Mom, you weren't even warm. Like, I was all the way down in this other room." So the mom now is just like, oh, the mom doesn't know what to think. She's like, how in the actual... So you get that fun little thing that happens, and then the dad, he's a truck driver in the film. He goes off because he's got to go to work. Well, while he's off at work, that's when the biggest paranormal event happens that basically sets them off and leads them to realize that, you know, what they're up against is not something of this world, essentially. And what happens is, you know, the mom's up late at night and she hears the girls playing this hide and clap game again. And while she hears them playing it, she's like, "Hey, girls, you know, it's way past your bedtime," because it's like 3 o'clock in the morning when this is going on, or it's pretty close to it. Anybody who knows 3 o'clock in the morning, witching hour significance. Actually, believe it or not, the fact that it was 3 o'clock, the witching hour, wasn't the big thing in the movie. It actually had more to do with one of the big reveals of why the house is haunted, which is someone killed themselves at 3:07 in the film. You know, one of the spirit ghost people. So what ends up happening is all of the clocks mysteriously stop at 3:07. Again, this is something that's been happening the whole film. You know, the family is realizing this and they're like, "Oh, that's a little strange." It's, again, as a viewer, you're like, okay, no, that's not strange. That's a damn sign. Something's not right. Like, all your clocks don't just stop at 3:07. Like, come on. And what happens is the mom, she goes down in the cellar because she hears something, so she goes down there to look, and the cellar door slams shut, locking her down there. Right before it does that, she hears 2 distinct claps right behind her, and then the door slams shut, and she's in complete darkness. So she sees something down in that cellar. Something's down there with her, and basically all hell's breaking loose downstairs. Well, all hell is breaking loose upstairs too, because there's something in the room with the girls. They can see something. Joey King, her character, ends up like freaking out, and at one point saying she sees something in the corner of her room, and it says that it wants to kill her family and stuff. So that's got her freaking out already. And so now the 2 girls are up in their room, and something's on top of the little wardrobe, the creepy wardrobe from earlier. Then that's another thing that plays a distinct part into the story later. There's this creepy freaking demon thing on top of it, which scared the shit out of me when I watched it. Even though I've seen this movie before, it's still, like, in terms of jump scares, it gets you. And so then at that point, you know, they realize they've got to get help. They've got to figure out what's going on. And so they turn to Ed and Lorraine, and that's when my favorite characters show up in the movie. So the mom goes to this little lecture thing, because Ed and Lorraine did a lot of lectures. They went around, they discussed the paranormal, they discussed their findings. It was very, very interesting. You know, I do wish I could have actually gotten to attend one. Unfortunately, they are both since passed away now, but that still would have been very neat to attend. But that would have been something very neat I wish I could have experienced before they passed away. So the mom goes to one of their lectures, where actually in the lecture they're showing clips of another exorcism, which I really like. I feel like that would have been a really cool one they could have made a movie on. And, you know, I'd be down. James Wan, if you're listening, I'd be down for this movie, because it would kind of be like a prequel to everything, because something happened during that exorcism, and I think we get an explanation on it in the second one, and we'll talk about that a little later as well. But I think we get an explanation on it at some point, but I still would have liked to have gotten like a movie of that exorcism that we see them kind of call back to, because it's really like, it's intense as all get out. You know, the guy's bleeding blood and shit. And, oh, it's crazy, man. So I really would have liked, I would have enjoyed a prequel of that. I feel like that would have made an actual really good movie if they hadn't gone and basically explained part of it in the second film. That would have been something very neat to kind of delve into, and maybe they will. I don't know. I would like more of a full story on that one. Of course, they say that one ended in a very gruesome kind of way. The man, supposedly, I think they said he killed himself. So, it did end very poorly. But I think that would be kind of an interesting sort of thing they maybe could do. Maybe show the Warrens. I don't want to call it failing, but maybe show them, not necessarily succeeding with the exorcism in this case. Because, like I said, Lorraine saw something in that case that messed her up, and we find out about it later on in the second one, which I think is really, really neat that they did that. Really neat tie-in. But I would still like I'd like a prequel. I'd like to see that exorcism that they discuss. That's the thing about it. When you're diving into real history, there's so much that you can dive into, and because of that, it gives you so much source material to play with. So who knows? Maybe they'll make a decision to do that one day. Who knows? I hope they do, but there's no telling. So the mom goes to see them talk and such, and tells her what's going on. Begs them to please just come look at the house, please, please, please. And they're like, okay. At first they're very reluctant. They're like, nah, we got a long drive back. We're not really feeling like doing that right now. But the mom is able to kind of convince them, please, I'm begging you. Just like she literally is. You could tell she's just losing it. And that's when things get fun in this movie, because now we get into the big let's piss off the spirits part of this film. Well, first, Ed and Lorraine go there to just kind of feel around and see if there could be something there. And they find out there is. Lorraine has her psychic connection that she uses, and she knows that something happened in that house. And she ends up seeing little spots of it. She sees where this woman has hung herself, and she can feel this whole story of what happened to these people. And so they agree that they're gonna help them, and they go home and do research. Well, the research on this place is nothing short of insane. And what's most disturbing about all these movies are based on true stories. And the thing about it is, you see based on a true story, the directors, the writers, they take liberties. Well, with this one in particular, I can't speak for nearly as much on the second and third one, but at least on this first one, they had Lorraine, the real Lorraine Warren, as a consultant on it. And so that really helped with authenticity. And so seeing the little things they did in the movie, you could see the parallels, and you could see, they stuck true to the source material, because going back and looking into it, there was a family that used to live there. There was a woman who killed herself, hung herself on a tree, sacrificed her baby as a witch. And that's what they find out in the movie, is there's this witchcraft stuff going on there. And so we find out this is very true. This is a very, everything that happened in that movie, to a degree, Hollywood's got to take a couple liberties still, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was no possession in the actual occurrences of the house, but it was more of a seance where something happened. And so the movie did, they did the Hollywood glitz and glamour just a little bit, to get that really nice reaction from the audience. And again, that's something we get into a little bit later. We're not, like I said, we're not going to give you full-on play-by-play, so we're not going to talk about all the stuff in between, because, they do their investigative stuff. They go in there, they set up bells and cameras and such around the house to basically prove the existence, because they have to prove the existence of the paranormal, of the afterlife, of the demonic, whatever you want to call it. They have to prove that existence to the Catholic Church to get an exorcism approved. And, that was the goal, was they wanted to get an exorcism of the house. Well, in the movie, the family is not by any stretch of the imagination really religious. Okay, I'm not going to say by any stretch of the imagination, because that just sounds like mean as hell. But they're not, they blanketly say, we're not really that religious. We're not the church-going type. Ed asks the father in the family, are your children baptized and such? And he's like, no, we're not really the church-going family. So what ends up happening is, they go in there and they collect the evidence. Bells ring. They see things. They hear things. It gets a little intense for a little while there. Some really crazy stuff happens. Well, then, you get the lighthearted portion of this movie. And I think that's what the Conjuring series does. That is it's very different from all your other not classic horror films, but your typical paranormal films. Typically, with a paranormal flick, everything's great at the beginning and then hits the fan. With The Conjuring, they find a way to make it as real as possible. Like, you go in there, things are intense. Well, at first things are great, because that's how it always starts. Everything's good on the home front, and then things flip around and get intense. But then what The Conjuring does so beautifully is they throw in these moments of lightheartedness, and I call them wholesome moments. There's a lot of wholesome moments in the Conjuring series, and I love that about this series, because they know how to basically say, we have a spirit haunting our home, but at the same time, it is not going to completely overtake our lives. Like, they know how to still have some lighthearted, fun moments. There's a whole scene where they basically, everything takes a lighthearted turn, and Ed and Lorraine tell the dad, hey, take the girls out, we'll watch things around here, we'll hold down the fort for you. So he's like, okay, yeah, cool, good deal. So the dad takes the girls out, mom stays there, she just wants to sleep and rest. And so Ed and Lorraine hang out around the house, and they have these lighthearted moments of Ed fixing a car and Lorraine doing laundry and stuff, and they play house for a little bit there. But as with any lovely horror film, psychological horror, paranormal, whatever you want to call it, all of this has to come to a bitter end at some point. And that's what happens next. Is Lorraine is out there doing the laundry while the mom takes a nap, and what she sees is the storm kind of rolls in. And when the storm rolls in, the sheets they get flung up, and they hit the window, and then when it moves away from the window, there's somebody standing there. Your true horror movie style, we gotta reveal the ghost in some crazy fashion like that. So there's a ghost in the room with the sleeping mom, and then we see what happens. Lorraine doesn't see it, but then we see something go inside the mom and basically possess her. Now, it is my understanding that there was no actual possession on the actual in the actual story. So that was a little Hollywood glamour for you, but we'll take it because it still makes for good film. So the mom gets possessed, and they kind of go back to, investigating, hanging out and stuff. Well, they see something. Things get thrown around and stuff. One of the kids does a weird kind of, the weird. Oh, she gets dragged around by her hair. I had to remember that for a minute. One of the girls gets dragged around by her hair, and prompting Lorraine to grab her scissors and chop the poor girl's hair off. And luckily, when this happens, though, not luckily, but when this happens, Ed looks at his camera guy. He's like, "Did you get that?" And he's like, "Yeah, we got that." And so that's all they need now as evidence to get the exorcism pushed through. So they move the family out, and they get the exorcism pushed through. And all the while, at some point, Lorraine found this secret little hatch inside the house, and she went in there and she fell down, and she was seeing things. Well, she lost her necklace that her daughter had given her, and they each had pictures inside of the necklace. It was a very beautiful thing. Well, what ends up happening is the spirit is kind of screwing with Lorraine a little bit by putting these images of their daughter drowning in the river and being killed and all this stuff. And so it's basically like the spirit kind of telling Lorraine, hey, I know exactly who you are, and you are not safe, and your family's not safe. So that's fun. So to just kind of fast track what happens here, Ed and Lorraine are sitting at home. They had this big scare with their daughter, who was basically being tormented by a spirit. I don't really know if it's the spirit of Annabelle or if it's the spirit of the ghost, because Annabelle was involved. So I really don't know. But anyways, so daughter gets tormented. Ed and Lorraine are at home waiting for the exorcism to be fast-tracked, which their priest liaison with the church, Father Gordon, says, I'll put it through myself to the Vatican to get it approved. And at that point, it's really too late, because about to hit the fan on the home front, and they've got to act now. So what ends up happening is we kind of jump back over to the family, or Ed and Lorraine get a phone call from the family saying, hey, mom just ran off with 2 of the girls. Well, now it's time for the final showdown. The mom has been possessed. They realize she's been possessed. The mom has taken the 2 girls back to the house to sacrifice them, basically, because the one who's possessed them is a witch. So she takes them back, and Ed and Lorraine and the rest of the family, they follow suit, and they chase after them. Well, at this point, the mom is possessed by the witch, and Ed realizes there's not a lot of options here, and he has to do the exorcism. Well, he tells Lorraine, he says, I have to do this, so you have to leave. Because the last time there was an exorcism, as we talked about earlier, she saw something. And it made her lock herself in a room for 8 days, not eat, drink, nothing. And so Ed's like, no, you can't be here for this. But Lorraine says, God brought us together for a reason. And this is it right here. We have to do this together. And that's something we hear several times throughout the movies, that God brought them together for a reason. And so they're like, okay, fine, stay. And Ed basically has to perform the exorcism, which turns into a very lengthy process, lots of Latin. And eventually he calls out the demon during he tells the demon to reveal itself, and the mom/demon is underneath a bed sheet, and when she says reveal herself, the sheet actually starts ripping through, and we see the demon's face. It's creepy. Yeah. So then the battle goes on. They keep doing the exorcism, and by the end of it, he ends up calling out the demon by name, which we learned in the second one actually gives you dominion over the demon, the spirit. So they call out the demon's name. I'm not going to say it. Not that I believe in necessarily conjuring up a demon by saying its name, but I'm just not going to say it just for the sake of being safe. If you want to see it, go watch the movie. It's fine. I'm just being a little, I guess, over dramatic. But they call the demon out by name and banish it back to hell. Demon immediately leaves the mom, and everything goes back to normal. Everything's fine. Everyone lives happily ever after. So it's a great movie. I mean, the first one definitely gets you going. And it's a great kind of start to the series, and I will say it leaves you wanting more. Like, when I finished it, I'm like, ooh, I'm so glad I have a second one, and really a third one, too, if I wanted to. I've got these other films I can go back and watch again. So that made me very, very happy, very excited to know that I had those with me. One thing I want to mention, and this, I know for a fact it holds true to the second one as well. The awesome thing about this was James Wan
did not use cussing in the films, maybe very brief. Didn't use cussing. He didn't use, sexual things, a lot of gore, nothing like that. But this movie still came out with an R rating. And the reason it came out with an R rating is because it is so terrifying, so disturbing, that it's enough to scare the living out of you. And I thought that can you think of a more proud moment as a director than to know I can scare the out of people with my movie with just the fact of how horrifying it is. I thought that's amazing. And it's true. I mean, this movie definitely has you jumping. And like I said, I've seen it before, but just laying there watching it at home, I was just like, oh my, I was jumping at moments I didn't think I'd be jumping at. Because I don't necessarily spook very easily in the movies. Even you go to the big theater, I don't freak out very often. Jump scares don't get me too often. The Conjuring is the exception to the rule for sure, because there are just things that you're like, no, and it gets you. And so I was I was jumping a lot during this movie. I was very, very, I don't want to say very scared, but I was definitely shaken. But yeah. So The Conjuring 1, the first one, we've seen it before, we saw it again. Amazing film. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I highly recommend it to anybody. If you're a horror junkie or you like to get a good scare, check out the whole Conjuring series for starters. But, start at the first one and work your way up to the third one. I think you'll be very, very pleased with your choice. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to talk about The Conjuring 2.
Hey there, Terror Talk fans. Are you looking for a new way to let your voice be heard? If so, check out our friends at Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for creating your very own podcast. They offer editing tools to create your podcast, which include your audio, listener audio, unique transitions, and custom advertisements. In addition, they'll also help you distribute your podcast to other listener sources, such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many others. With this unique app, you also have the chance to get paid for your podcast by simply placing ads for various sponsors in your videos. Best part of it all? It is 100% free. Anchor does all the work for you and makes podcasting as simple as turning on a light. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's ANCHOR.FM. Whether you're new to podcasting, doing it as a hobby, or hosting a professional show, Anchor is the place for you.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, on this episode of The Terror Talks. If you joined us a couple days ago, we watched The Conjuring 3 and got to experience that. And today we're talking about the other two installments of the Conjuring series, the first and second one. Before the break, we talked about the first Conjuring movie, which was amazing in my opinion. It set a new precedent for movies like this. And now we're going to talk about the second Conjuring. So this one is, in a way, kind of the same as the first one. How different can you really get? But honestly, I think the second one for me was a little bit scarier. So this one still stars the lovely Vera Farmiga as Lorraine Warren and the amazing Patrick Wilson as Ed Warren. But this movie takes place in a little bit of a different location. So in this movie, we get to go across the pond, as one might say, to England. The whole movie takes place over in England. It focuses on another small family, this time with a little bit of different circumstances from the other one. It's a broken family. The husband had left the mom, and so it is just the mom and her 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. One has a stutter, one is kind of like the rebellious child, thinks she doesn't really fit in. Your typical kind of horror movie family. In this movie, though, it doesn't start off with them. once again, it kind of starts off with Ed and Lorraine working on another case, and we actually get to see them as they took part in the Amityville horror case. So that's a very interesting thing we get to witness in this, because, you know, they've made countless Amityville horror movies. You know, we've heard the story. Everyone knows the story. The man who shot his kids and his family, killed them all, took the stand and testified that he was not of a decent state of mind. That's why he killed him. He was possessed, basically saying he did not have any control over his actions. Whether that's true or not, you know, that's for you to decide. Take your own judgments, look at the case file, do whatever you want. I'm not going to take a side on it because I don't have all the information. I just know what little bit I know, because I really have not dived too much into the Amityville horror case. I'd like to, you know, kind of watch the movies, read the real case, and see what I could find out about. The only thing I know for sure is what they portrayed in this movie, which was many different type of paranormal people went and investigated this, and basically in the end, a lot of them have come out and said, oh, the Amityville haunting was just a hoax, the family was just in it for the money, yada, 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 you know, whatever you want to say, whatever your deductive reasoning is on that one. That's what a lot of people say about that case, and this movie actually plays into that a little bit. So we start off with Ed and Lorraine. They're with a group of, I'm guessing psychics, I think, I'm not sure. But they're all sitting around a table, and Lorraine does her little psychic connection thing where she can step into the past, basically, and see what happened. And so she does that and actually watches the man kill his family. And then she ends up going down to the basement and seeing this really creepy looking nun. Like, you can tell she's a demon. It's a demon nun. Not much is really touched upon in that moment. And it's very, we don't know what's going on. But what we do see at one point is we see an image of Ed, and he gets impaled by a giant piece of wood, a tree, and it goes right through the center of him, and he dies. And of course that sends Lorraine freaking out, and that's all we really see of that. Case closed, move on with their lives. And so that's when we jump across the pond and we meet this new family, and we kind of look in on them for a little bit. And what's interesting is the little girl is kind of playing with a spirit board that her and one of her schoolmate friends had made. And it doesn't work. You know, when they play with it, you know, nothing happens. The pieces don't move. No ghosts talk to them. But shortly after that, they start to experience weird things. They hear noises in the hall. The daughter is sleepwalking, and she wakes up in this really old, ruggedy-looking chair in the corner of a room. And that actually becomes a very vital part of the story later, as we find out. I didn't realize it at the time, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now. So, weird stuff happens, and eventually it gets so bad to the point where there's this old man paranormal ghost thing talking through the little girl. And it comes out as this really grumpy, grouchy old man, and it tells them that, he died and all this stuff. There's all this really creepy imagery in this one. I'm going to be honest, this one, for me, might have actually been the scariest one for me. This is the one that actually, when I was sitting there watching it, I remember, just my whole body going numb when a moment would get very tense. I remember just everything. I would just go completely numb and just, anticipate the scare that was inevitable. And then when it came, I was just like, Jesus, I would freak out. And, watching this in a dark room on a laptop, that's saying a lot because, half of the scares that you can emit from these movies are jump scares accompanied by like a really loud bang or something. And, you know, to watch it on a little tiny laptop screen and not get that same experience, but still just get scared out of your right mind. I mean, that speaks volumes to the work of the people who made this film. So we see all the strange occurrences happening in the house. There's this really creepy imagery of this crooked man. It is absolutely daunting. Like, it makes you uncomfortable. And then what's worse, like, at first you just see it's a playful, harmless little nursery rhyme, which I kind of love. Like, you have this element of a nursery rhyme, which nursery rhymes in themselves are already creepy enough as it is. And so this movie just gave, like, an added creep factor to what a nursery rhyme is. It's supposed to help you fall asleep and be comforting to children. No, not in this movie. In this movie, nursery rhymes might just be your death sentence. So there's all this creepy imagery, and then we flash back over to Ed and Lorraine after, you know, there's a lot of craziness happening on the home front. Well, Ed is seen painting, and he actually paints a picture of the nun that Lorraine saw in her vision, saying that it came to him and he can't get the image out of his head. And as soon as Lorraine finds out about it, she never told him about what she had seen. So when she finds out that he had painted what she had seen, her guard is now up. She is ready to fight whatever this is. Actually, she's really more so ready to go and hide from whatever this is. So she straight up looks at him and says, "Promise me we won't take any more cases. We'll do the lectures, all that, but you have to trust me on this." So he trusts her and says, "Okay, fine." Well, this is where things take a turn, because back over on the British front, things are not looking so well. The girl is still being possessed, and now it's become a big media circus. The media has gotten hold of the fact that this young girl is possessed by the spirit of some crotchety old man, and basically they're like putting cameras in front of her and everything, and they're calling it the Britain's Amityville horror story, essentially. And so it gets to the point where they actually have some stuff on recording, and it gets back to Ed and Lorraine, who if you remember from the first one, Father Gordon is their church liaison. He comes to them and says, "I've got something. I need you to go over there to just determine if this is real or not." Because a lot of people aren't quite believing that it's real, and they cannot go to the church to get help if it seems like they're making things up in any way. So they reluctantly agree, but before they do, Lorraine tells Ed that she lets us sit on the vision that she saw in not only the Amityville house, but we find out that's what she saw during the exorcism back in the first movie. The one where, you know, she just kind of lost it. Turns out she was getting a vision of Ed's death in both of these, and that's why she is so scared. That's why she freaked out so much. So I'm really glad that the directors found a way to tie in the second one, kind of give a call back to the first one. So in that regard, I'm actually really happy about that. But as I said earlier, I still wouldn't mind getting some sort of, I guess, a prequel to everything, you know, seeing that case that basically is the one case that they didn't necessarily succeed in. So I'm still pulling for that. James Wan, if you're listening, come on, it's an idea, man. Let's write the screenplay. Let's do it. So they agree to go over there, but you know, Lorraine makes Ed promise if things get too dangerous, we leave and let the church take care of it. And he's like, absolutely okay. They don't really listen, because things get dangerous pretty quickly, in my opinion. They get over there, and they basically start talking to the young girl, who says that she cannot. She says that the spirit inside her head will not talk to them unless they turn around. Suspicious much? Yeah, just a little bit. And there are some skeptics over in London who actually try to prove that as well. They're like, yeah, you know, it's a little convenient that she won't do it if you're all watching her. So there's no, like, major proof. But they have her drink a glass of water and hold it in her mouth to prove that it's not some strange ventriloquism thing. And sure enough, it actually, through our eyes as the viewer, that's what we see. We never see her spit the water out and take another sip, nothing like that. It is something else talking to us. And so, they realize there's something in there, and Ed, he holds up his crucifix, his cross, on his neck, and he holds it up to the girl who at the time is inhabited by the spirit, and the spirit starts freaking out and saying something, which also again comes into play later. So that happens, and then we get, like we have in every Conjuring movie, we get the lighthearted moment. And in this one, the lighthearted moment is it's Christmas time, which I kind of love that this movie takes place at Christmas time, because I've heard that paranormal activity is more powerful during the colder months. So I really do kind of like that. So that's an interesting little thing. I don't know if that was the intent and why they said it during Christmas time, or if it just, that's just the way everything planned out. Who knows? So they basically help the family celebrate Christmas, and we have this very heartwarming moment where Ed picks up the guitar and he plays music for the kids, and he sings I Can't Help Falling in Love with You by Elvis, and he does like a whole little Elvis Presley kind of thing. And so, it's a cute, very heartfelt, somber moment, only to be shattered shortly thereafter. He starts going around and kind of fixing things up, because they're living in a very, very ratchety old house that it's more of a fixer-upper than what the last family in the first one had. So he's basically going around trying to help them fix everything, because, nothing really is happening at the time. And while he's doing that, something comes after them, and things basically start to go awry once again, and the ghosts are there, and all hell breaks loose. Well, upstairs in one of the rooms, the kitchen door is kind of all slammed shut, and we see the kitchen is absolutely trashed. Absolutely trashed. And so we're like, oh geez, what happened? And then we find that the little girl is kind of all contortionismed up inside of a little box or thing. There's no way, how could she have gotten in that position? I don't know. There's no logical explanation. Well, he holds up the crucifix again to the girl who is possessed at the time, and the demon starts yelling something again, or the entity starts yelling again, and that's that. It goes away. They get her out. Well, just as they're like, okay, we're starting to get proof again, the skeptic from earlier happens to be there, and she comes up and says, she's faking it, I have proof. And they look at a video, and it shows the girl who is possessed literally throwing things around the kitchen to make it look like the ghost did it. Well, this immediately just trashes everything, and everyone says, okay, we're leaving. We can't do anything for you, because as soon as the church sees that, or if that video gets out, the church will lose all credibility. And that's half the battle, they say, with these exorcisms and such, and turning to the church for help. Half the battle is the credibility that they have. So I get that. So they go away. Well, while they are leaving to go, Ed and Lorraine are on a train. Well, they go to put their baggage and such up on the rack. Well, it falls down, and the two tapes that they were given kind of fall into the shape of a cross, and Ed kind of looks at it for a minute, and he's like, huh. You can tell there's something, he realizes something. So he quickly, before the train even starts moving, starts to set up the tape recorders to test his theory. They listen to one recording, which is the first time that he held the cross up to the entity. And then he plays the second recording. And they listen to both of them, and he goes, Lorraine, if I'm right,
then we've got a problem here. So he plays the two at the exact same time, and they form a message that basically is saying, help, she won't let me go. Help, she won't let me go. She won't leave me alone. And what we find out is the crotchety old man that we keep hearing, he's not harmful at all. He's being used as a pawn, and so is the crooked man as well. They are both pawns in a much deeper game, and it turns out that it is the nun, the creepy demon nun that we saw over in the Amityville Horror House, and that has been terrorizing Lorraine. I forgot to mention earlier in the film, the nun actually kind of terrorized Lorraine in her own home, and like just completely toyed with her. You know, it's kind of like when a vulture, not a vulture, or an animal will play with its food right before it kills it. That's basically what the nun was doing to Lorraine, and it worked. It drove Lorraine crazy. But when it tortured her at home, it basically told her her name, and she wrote it down in her Bible. So once they've listened to these tracks back, they realize, oh no, oh this is a demon who is basically performing blasphemy against the church by taking the form of something holy, which is the nun. It's basically being blasphemous because it knows it is mocking the faith of Lorraine and Ed. And this is where the big, as in every Conjuring movie, the big final showdown comes up. They rush back. They realize what's happening, and they run back to the house to save the girl. Well, when they get there, the door has already been slammed shut, and the mom and the other 3 kids are locked out, and the possessed girl is inside. And there's this big, massive thunderstorm that's coming through. The wind's howling. It's absolutely crazy. Well, they're trying to figure out how can we get in there to save them. And when they get there, Ed's like, all right, come on, let's go. And so he actually tries to break in the window, but the demon blocks the window. Well, they sneak around back, and Ed goes in first, but then the door slams shut, locking him inside, and Lorraine can't get to him. And of course, naturally, she starts freaking out because she knows what her vision is. It's her vision of him dying. And there's nothing she can do to stop it now, because she's begging him to wait. But Ed knows he can't just wait because the girl doesn't have that much time. He has to save her now or it's over. So he's like, I love you, I'm sorry. And he goes to save the girl while one of the friends tries to break down the door with Lorraine there, freaking out. Well, eventually, we actually do get inside, and Lorraine manages to get inside, but not before Ed has to go on a little battle of his own on the inside. What ends up happening is he turns on, or I say he does, the ghost actually turns on this hot water pipe and bursts it, spraying water right into his eyes, blinding him. Or, not blinding him, but blurring his vision to an extreme degree. And this just screws everything up. The poor guy has to kind of maneuver around blindly, and eventually he pulls out his crucifix from his shirt, does the sign of the cross, and begins doing the exorcism ritual. And this leads to a very tense final act, because I'll tell you, I was just sitting there like, obviously I've seen the third one, so I know he's not going to die. Obviously he's alive. But just watching it and being there in the moment, you are panicking for him. You are scared that this guy is about to meet his maker. He's going to meet his match. And you're hoping that there's something that can be done to save him. Whether or not there is, that remains to be seen by that point. So he goes around the house, and on the outside, what he doesn't see is this big old lightning strike hits a tree and makes the tree split into a perfect piercing piece of wood.
the piece of wood from Lorraine's vision. As soon as she sees that, she's like, oh, because she knows. She knows what's happening here. Well, go back inside, and Ed's still going around the house with his crucifix trying to find where he's going. He eventually makes it to the room where the girl has screamed and the windows have flown out, and so she's possessed, and the ghost is about, or the demon is about to make her walk out the window and pierce herself. He grabs her just the right time, but he's hanging on to a shower curtain or a bedroom curtain that's about to snap, which really adds a very difficult layer here. And so he's about to fall, and luckily Lorraine at this point, she's made it inside, and she gets in the room, and she looks at the demon who's standing there in the corner, and she looks at it and calls it by its name and says, I banish you back to hell. And the demon is banished back to hell, and she is able to run and grab Ed at the last possible second, right before he can fall to his death. And so she saves him. Everything's great, and it's awesome. You know, it's a big not a cliffhanger. It's a big monumental moment at the end. You don't know what's going to happen, and it all works out for the better. Thank God, because that would have been really sad. You know, I can't imagine The Conjuring 3 without Ed. Luckily, I didn't have to. So that's The Conjuring 2, and I have to say, it is just as good as the first one and just as good as the third one. And in my opinion, probably the scariest one. There's one scene that I distinctly remember that, and it's so funny because of the simplicity of it. Because it disturbed me to a point where I had to look away from the screen and close my eyes, because I was like, nope. Because I knew, like, it's the imagery, really. That's what gets you sometimes. And what it was there was a scene where the girl was in a room, and we know the demon is there to get her, and the whole room is covered, absolutely covered in crosses. Like, every inch of the wall has a cross on it, because the neighbor sent them, so they hang them up thinking it'll make the stuff stop. It doesn't, but they tried. What ends up happening in this scene is every single one of those crosses in that room flips upside down. Now, obviously, I am strong enough in my faith to, know that is wrong, but because of that, it actually made me very uncomfortable, which is very difficult to do in a movie like this. Like, it had me, like, literally, I was just like, oh no. Like, it made my stomach hurt a little bit. I had to turn away. I couldn't watch. And not only was just the sheer imagery of it enough to make you just go, oh, but then something's going to happen with it, and I can't fully remember something. I'm sure something happened. But it was just that sheer image of all the crosses flipping. Ugh. It actually makes my stomach hurt right now just talking about it, because it really was just gut-wrenching. But like I said earlier, this movie, out of the whole Conjuring series, I would say this one was probably, for me, the scariest. And I don't necessarily know why that is. I think what gets me about this one more than the other two is, in this one, the circumstances are those that can be easily related to for many people. So, like in the first one, obviously those circumstances are relatable in that, anybody can move into a new home. That happens. And then the third one, it's kind of relatable, but the likelihood of being cursed by a witch are not nearly as likely. So that one you can kind of give some leeway to as well. The second one gets me because these people were already living in their house. They
didn't do anything other than the girl played with the spirit board that she made. And that's what I think gets me, is because I know those Ouija boards are dangerous. You don't f*** with those. You do that, you are asking for trouble at that point. But, I think it's that sheer idea of that could easily happen to me. That could happen in my house. And that's what's the scariest. If you heard us talk on an episode the other day, and it was episode 7, I believe, we talked about the thing that really scares people the most is the fear of reality, I guess you could call it. The fear of seeing something that could actually happen. The things that are familiar to us are the things that are the most scary, because they look familiar, but could still hurt you potentially. And in a way, that's the case here, because you can live in any house, and all it takes is that dumb friend who said, "Hey, let's play with the Ouija board. It's a great idea." You play with that, and it's game over 9 out of 10 times. And, it's kind of funny, because in the movie, the girl actually says, "Oh, it's just a silly game." When she said that, I'm just sitting there going, no, it's really not. It can be very serious. Now, thank God I've never had the experience of a Ouija board, and hopefully never do, because I don't think I would cope well with that in that situation at all. But, it is a very real situation. I caution you, if you use one of these spirit boards, to be very cautious, take precautions with it, which really there are only so many you can take, because, as we know, once something demonic or an entity latches on you, there's a line in the first one that Ed says, it's kind of like gum. It's very hard to get off. And that's very true. So, just be careful is all I can say, Obviously, I won't tell people what to do. I can advise against it all day, but that doesn't mean you're going to listen to me. Just be careful with things like that, okay? So that's The Conjuring 1 and 2. Great movies. I'm so glad that I can now safely say I have seen all 3 in their entirety, and I really, really hope that James Wan or somebody related to those 3 projects comes in and writes a 4th one. I would love another addition to the Conjuring story. I'm like I keep saying, prequel to that first one. I'm all for it. I'd love to get maybe like a prequel of Ed and Lorraine's first kind of very first encounter, if you will, how they got started in this paranormal world. I would love something like that. It's very interesting. I got to watching the movies and going back. There are some lines and things that actually really cracked me up, because they were callbacks to the first one. So in the third movie, there's a scene where the priest he takes them down to their cellar, all the demonic or cult things that he had collected, and they ask him, well, why not just burn it all? And he says, better to be locked away. It's sort of like taking guns off the street. And I never caught it, but in the first movie, somebody goes down into Ed and Lorraine's basement where they keep all of their little oddities that they collect, and they ask Ed, why not just burn all this? And he says, oh, it's better to just keep them all locked away. It's kind of like keeping guns off the street. And I thought, oh, now that I've seen it, I'm like, okay, I get it now. There was another line. There was somewhere in there. There was another thing that happened, and fortunately now I can't really remember what it was exactly. But there was another parallel line, because I remember when I watched the first one again, I went, oh, I get it. And I'm like, the third one was calling back to all these moments from the first couple ones. I love that they did that. I think that's
that's ingenious, and it goes to show the level of detail that these script writers follow when they write these movies. So that's going to do it for us here on episode 9 of the Terror Talks. We were talking about The Conjuring 1 and 2. Go check them out on Netflix if you can, or buy the movie even, I'm all for that. But go check it out. Great movies. James Wan did amazing. The actors did amazing. Script writers, amazing. Just all around. It's a great flick. It's a great story. It's awesome. Go check it out as soon as you can. If you like what we do here on the Terror Talks channel, be sure to give us a like, comment, subscribe, rate. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Pocket Cast, and so much more. If I missed any, they will more than likely be in the description. Go check out our friends over at Tales from the Crypt. You heard their little plug that we have every episode. You heard that during the break we took earlier. And also go check out our friends over at the unofficial Universal Orlando podcast and their sister podcast, Rush of Fear. They cover all things Halloween Horror Nights, and they deserve a lot of attention on that. Those guys are geniuses in what they do. They get all the details that everybody else misses. They dot the T's, cross the I's. They've got everything. So go give them a like, a follow, a comment. Check them out. They are absolutely great. But that's going to do it for us here on the Terror Talks. Tune in with us next time, and we will see you next time on the Terror Talks.